let's start with a show of hands. Of you guys in the room, how many of you know exactly what you want to do when you graduate? You've kind of got locked down. 3 people? How about those of you who have absolutely no idea? 2 people? And so I presume anyone else is in between? I guess the rest of the room?
Got a vibe.
Okay, that's good. We can work with that. Has anyone seen this? I think that's called a Venn diagram. Has anyone seen this before? So this is kind of the holy grail, what we're aiming for in terms of careers. There's 3 call it focus areas that you could be thinking about when you're trying to work out what it is you're actually solving for in a career, what you love, what you're good at, and what pays well. And you want to find something that ideally intersects all 3. So to give you an example, I love eating pizza. I'm very good at eating pizza. I can eat a lot of pizza. I've won eating competitions. So I love it, very good at it. I'm not going to find anybody who's going to pay me to eat pizza. And so if I wanted to pursue that as a career path, I'd be happy but poor. And so obviously what you're trying to solve for is something that sits smack bang in the middle. Now, the way I think about it, what pays well, fairly easy to work out, right? That's look it up online, pay scale, usually on job listings you can see. You can get a feel for who's going to pay you to do certain jobs. So we can assume that's taken care of. What you're good at, similarly, is relatively easy to work out. That probably not going to be a mystery to most of you in this room. I think what I'd like to spend some more time talking about before we get into the nuts and bolts is working out what you love, because I feel like that's what most people get wrong. I went into civil engineering, I don't really know why, and right throughout the degree I was like, I'm doing civil engineering, I've got the blinkers on, I'm doing civil engineering, therefore I'm going to be a civil engineer, and didn't put any thought into what that actually meant and whether or not I'd actually enjoy it. The turnover of young graduates early in their career is extremely high. So they'll go in, typically last less than 2 years, and end up going into, that employers aren't able to hang on to them very long at all. Like I said, I've worked in a bunch of different jobs, mining, suit and tie in Sydney as a management consultant, entrepreneurship. I worked in a bar for a bunch of my time at uni. Anyone want to guess what the most stressful job was for me out of all those roles? It's a good guess. No. The most stressful job I've ever had was working in a bar. And the reason is because I'm an introvert. I struggle with all that sort of sensory overload, whatever you want to call it. And so for me, I'm more of a lone wolf introvert, just too much being in a bar environment. Caroline, on the other hand, she's also worked in a lot of jobs. BCG, also in a consulting firm, journalism, media, sales, all the rest. And bar jobs, and she loves the bar jobs. It's in her element. And that's nothing more than, mapping, doing a better job of mapping to these different metrics. What I'd suggest, if you're kind of completely lost, if you don't really know where you sit, there's a bunch of free online personality assessments that I think are a really good start. There's hundreds out there. There's one called principlesu.com. I'd recommend that because it's fairly thorough, well written, free. Takes about 10 minutes to complete, so it's not a big deal. That'll help you map your own innate attributes and personality back to some important characteristics and traits like this so that you can take that into account when you're thinking about careers. All right, so I want to jump into setting the scene with 2 charts. And I think these are pretty scary charts for you guys. This first one is the percentage of 16 to 64-year-olds in Australia that have a bachelor's level degree or above. I find this really quite staggering. Back in the sort of 70s and 80s, it was 5% of the population had a bachelor's degree. It was quite rare, back when, say, our parents were our age. Fast forward to today, and it's knocking on the door of 35%. In our demographic, it's actually more or less the norm to have a degree. And so that's very different to what it was 20, 30 years ago. And it has real implications for the job market that you guys are rolling into. Second chart is the proportion or percentage of A grades that are awarded to graduates of 4-year US colleges. Now this is US specific because Australian universities don't release this data despite numerous requests. But this trend is happening across all the different Western countries where this data is collected and reported. And so an A grade, you think of it as broadly equivalent to a distinction in an Australian university. So in other words, again, back in the 60s and 70s, it was quite rare to graduate with an A or to get a subject with an A, sort of circa 15%. Fast forward to today, and it's almost the norm. Most students are going to graduate with an A. Grades are a less reliable signal of someone's intelligence or their fit for a particular job. These next couple of charts are based on a survey. It's actually done annually of about usually 100, 110 of the leading graduate employers in Australia. They're listed out here, a lot of big names. We don't need to go into it. But to your point, these employers are receiving a huge number of applications for every position they're hiring for. On average, 42 candidates or applicants per position. So, I mean, to put that in the context, what is there in this room? 30 odd? I don't know. So add another 10 or 15 to that, look around you and just assume that all of you guys are fighting tooth and nail for that one position. And unfortunately, that's the reality of the graduate job market right now. Number one out of all the attributes that were offered up to them, communication skills. Nearly 90% are not just assessing it, but saying that it's very important in their screening process. Number two, teamwork, followed by interpersonal skills, followed by resilience, followed by a whole bunch of other stuff, self-management, initiative, emotional intelligence. Does anyone want to guess, there's two more right at the bottom here. Does anyone want to guess what the two that bring up the rear that are least important to employers? Relevant work experience and grades. So it kind of plays into this story we're starting to establish about them having to prioritise other metrics over grades. Now, to be clear, they're still looking at grades, and it's an easy metric to screen someone out on, and if an employer is lazy, they will use it and have a minimum threshold, and no matter what your CV looks like for some employers, it's just, there's no thought involved. So a lazy employer will just rely on that to screen when they've got far too many candidates. But, there's more than 1 in 5 here who aren't even looking at grades, which I find really interesting. And I suspect if those trends we saw on the first couple of slides continue, that percentage of employers that are looking at grades, that are not looking at grades rather, will continue to grow. Before I jump into how we can show we've got this sort of stuff to employers, I want to show you one other chart which I found interesting. The same employers were asked, of the skills you assessed, which ones were students most commonly lacking? And again, I look at this is an encouraging chart, because understanding by organisation is a really basic one to get right. That just means going in and understanding the role you're applying for, knowing what the company does, knowing their business model, writing your cover letter such that it's kind of tailored to that organisation. So I feel like that's an easy one for all of us to get right. And the good news is that if you get that right, that straight away puts you ahead of 1/3 of those 42 other candidates before you've even got into the first round of assessments. So that's really low-hanging fruit. So I just wanted to keep that in mind. So the key here is, what can we do so we can put some experiences on our CV to actually show an employer that we've got the goods they're looking for. So I've got a bunch of ideas here. Community involvement, take on leadership roles within college, student society or sporting team. Casual work, temporary gigs, freelance assignments. You know, you don't need to have a bunch of professional work experience for it to look good on your CV. I'll give you a simple example with bar work. Most bars you work in, particularly if you're on the front bar, you're going to have to do, you have to deal with rowdy customers, for example. So that's stellar dispute resolution, teamwork, communication, all that kind of stuff. So it is relevant and employers do recognise it. So don't feel like the only type of relevant experience that you can put on your CV is an internship in the same sector that you're applying for. That's a really important point. The key is just to make sure when you put that on your CV that you kind of explain what it is you did that lines up with these sorts of things that employers are looking for. Similar to college, there's a bunch of stuff you can do at uni, university clubs, societies, various membership organisations and bodies that have student committees and all the rest. Plenty of really cool opportunities to demonstrate you've got these skills, learn a lot, meet people, all the rest. Study abroad semester, not so practical now with coronavirus, but I know that some people screening CVs will look to that as a signal of someone's resilience and initiative and that kind of stuff. I've kind of covered that, but sporting organisations, if you're playing in a team, that obviously takes some commitment, some resilience, and then especially if you're taking on a leadership role within a team. Unique hobbies and interests. I'll mention this because, sorry, I'm going to embarrass you again, Jordan. Jordan's thinking about a career in military aviation, and I was looking at his CV, and one of the things, I don't know if you mentioned it to me or it was in the CV, anyway, he's built a fully functioning working flight simulator in his garage by himself. Now, that's pretty damn cool, and again, if you put yourselves in the shoes of a poor old recruiter screening 2,000 CVs a day, all with the same grades, all with the same, similar work experience, and you see this guy's, wants a job with BAE Systems as a pilot, and he's built a bloody flight simulator. I feel like you just have to meet that guy, right? I'm just like, thank God, this sounds like an interesting guy to meet. And so I think if you do have really unique hobbies and interests, and that in some way speaks to the career you're looking to go into, throw it in, because half the battle here is something to stand out. So I thought that was a good example. Volunteering and fundraising, again, you've absolute layup here at college. Like I think I saw on the forum today, a call for people to go into the soup kitchen. Go do that a couple of times a month. Learn a lot, meet a different bunch of people. Again, communication skills, all the rest, and looks great in your CV. Launch a small business or startup. Now, that sounds daunting. I'm not saying you need to launch the next Facebook or anything, but I remember when I was screening CVs at the consulting firm I used to work at, and again, like you're literally going through hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, and they're all the same. And there was one that the guy had run a small online e-commerce store where he was selling phone covers, and it might have been turned over a few $1,000s. So by no means life-changing, not a big deal, but it demonstrates all this sort of stuff. Self-management, commercial awareness is a big one that's missing in lots of clients. And again, I just thought, that's interesting, that's something to talk about, I want to meet this guy. Take a short course to gain a micro-credential. So this actually wasn't a thing when I was at uni, so I'll take the time to show you what I mean. Anyone heard of like Coursera or Udemy or any of these sorts of things? If you're sort of strategic about the types of courses that you pick, it can actually really help with your CV. So I'll default to consulting because that's what I know. But it's true. A lot of firms like analytical skills, and in particular Excel. You've probably heard a bit. It's probably thinking about doing an Excel course here at college. So I'm on Coursera, not that, this is one of 20 different options, but you go on here, you look up, Excel, let's say Excel skills for business. And we've got 380 options here for, Excel for business. Some of them look, varied quality, but I mean, I saw the other day there was one here, there's one by IBM, for example, IBM data analyst. Similarly, PwC and a lot of the accounting firms run them. So if you see for example, you're hell-bent on consulting or a job that's sort of high on the analytical stuff with Excel, you can do these sorts of courses. It's not a big commitment, sort of 10, 12 hours. I think most of them are free or a nominal charge if you want to get the certificate afterwards. So spend a few minutes just searching around, seeing options, because again, you can learn a lot from it, but it can look good on a CV. And then another example of a variation of a passion project, side project, build a website, something like that to demonstrate you've got get up and go. This is by no means comprehensive, but you can see a whole bunch of stuff here that, you add it up and you can start to paint a really good picture of all these different skills that employers are looking for. And then finally, just to tie it all together, I don't want to make this out like it's a sort of a box ticking exercise and you have to go through and build a CV for the sake of building a CV. You sort of go through this process and you come out as someone that an employer can look at and go, yeah, this is someone that takes responsibility and shows initiative. And there's a certain depth of character to someone that's done all this varied different stuff that is really, really attractive to employers and in life for that matter. And then I mentioned the airport test. Has anyone heard that before? So I first heard it in consulting, but I know it's sort of been picked up across a lot of different industries. What it is, as a recruiter, when you're interviewing someone, you ask yourself, you put yourself in the scenario, if I was on a project with this person, heading to or from the project, and the flight's been delayed by 5 hours, and I'm faced with the prospect of sitting in the airport for 5 hours with this person, do I want that? And if the answer is no, you shouldn't hire them. So again, I feel like that is just a variation of this depth of character, varied experience, a curious person with varied interests that it all points to the same thing to me. So bringing it all together, don't worry too much about what is on this CV. This is just a hodgepodge of different examples. But the point is that when it comes time to pull your CV together, the ideal scenario is that education is still at the top, but it's only 10% of your real estate on the CV. Now, this is a big area where I came undone. If we know what employers are looking for, we've got some idea of how to demonstrate that. Next step is kind of put that into action. So let's assume a 4-year degree. I know a bunch of you will have 3-year degrees, so you've actually got 1 year less than what we're assuming, but let's work with the 4-year for now. And you want to start in January of the first year after you've graduated. So study through in November, Christmas holidays with the family, hit the ground running with a graduate job, okay? Which is pretty normal, right? So knowing that, let's work backwards from here. Most graduate job programs open and close their applications in March of your final year. Don't be like me and get to November, be like, all right, here we go, time for a job. And then jump online and realise, oh shit, I've bloody stitched myself up here. Don't let that catch you unawares, okay? And you would not believe how many students miss that. It's so common. It's so easy. I mean, you just assume that you apply once you graduate. It's logical, right? Not the case. So, All right, let's keep working back. So if we're going to put in the ideal CV, it'd be nice to have some kind of internship there. Again, not completely necessary, but if we can manage it. So that kind of takes up November through to January of your penultimate year, okay? Stepping back again, applications for the internship program are June, mostly July, August of your penultimate year, which means you've kind of got to get your CV and all your ducks in a row before mid-year of your third year. If you're really looking to put your best foot forward for, to set yourself up with a nice run into a grad program application. So what does that mean? You've really got your first 2 years, or if you're doing a 3-year degree, your first year, to sort of lay the foundations for a lot of these skills. And we've kind of been through these, but a lot of these are not something that happen overnight. You kind of need to start thinking about now. So if there's one thing to take away from this, it's just regardless of where you are in your degree, and it's not as if, if you're in final year, it's not as if all hope's lost. I'm sure you've done a lot of good stuff. But regardless of where you are, just get on the front foot with the proactive extracurricular stuff. Let's get into even more detail. So we kind of know what a good CV looks like. We know what employers are looking for. Come time to apply for graduate jobs, when the rubber actually hits the road, how do you think most graduates actually find their first employer? This, the answer to this actually really surprised me. So this was a study last done back in 2017, hasn't been done since, but all the years prior it was the same. So pretty reasonable to assume that this hasn't changed a whole lot. Check out that. Nearly half of graduates actually found their employer via networking. I found this incredible. In fact, I nearly didn't launch Prosple when I saw this, because I thought, what's the point if people aren't using jobs boards? I'm kind of launching a business to cater to 1/3 of the market. Everyone's just finding it through word of mouth. I end up concluding, or I at least hope, that a big chunk of this is due to inefficiencies in the market, and therefore we can serve more than 1/3 of students. But that's a pretty unreal statistic if you stop and think about it. That nearly half of students find the employer they get their first graduate job with via a network. In other words, by all means look on jobs boards, but it's not the leading driver of students finding jobs, and we'll get into that in a bit. Career services can be helpful. I'd say probably less now so than they were back in 2017 due to budget cuts and whatnot. And then there's other, which is kind of random stuff like recruitment agencies and whatnot. So to me, I look at this and think, all right, well, obviously networking's pretty damn important, particularly if everyone else is going to jobs boards. What can I do to get my foot in the door by networking? That seems like a pretty important question to spend some time on, which we will. Okay, so let's take this 46%. Anyone want to guess, of the students who are finding jobs via networking, which networking channels are most effective? So the number one of that 46% was this bucket of direct approach. Either you getting on the front foot and contacting the employer, or they know you through their network and them contacting you. 1 in 3. It's pretty high. So we'll talk more about that in a sec. Second largest source of this networking connections with graduate employers, family and friends. Work contacts and your work network. And then college, faculty, lecturers, for example, here at St Mark's, Old Coles. Faculties and lecturers don't feel uncomfortable about pulling your lecturer aside and asking them for an introduction, or if they know anybody who's hiring, because it might feel uncomfortable, but it doesn't mean it's the wrong thing to do. You guys are paying good money to be at uni, and that's the least you can expect. And then careers fairs and information sessions. So that's the form of networking. And have any of you guys been to a careers fair at uni? Yeah? Just, big expo, a bunch of employers with booths. One thing I didn't realise, and I've spoken to a few students who also didn't realise this, if you get chatting to them and they give you their business card, that actually means they want you to follow up with them. I got that and I was like, oh, HR, I don't want to work in HR, in the bin. So don't be an idiot like me, because I've been on the other side in employment booths, and you're speaking to bloody 500 students a day, and maybe 2% of them are remotely worth following up with, and you don't give your business card out left, right and centre, because you don't want to have to deal with the follow-ups, except if they're exceptional. So if you go to a careers fair, dress nicely, present yourself well, get chatting, ask intelligent questions, and if they give you a business card, then that's a legit form of networking, because they're not doing that to every student. And then, what strategies can you use to network? Obvious one, actually go to the careers fairs. And there's usually two a year at each university. You'll have your graduate careers fairs in March of each year, and you'll have internship fairs in July, August. Go along to, if you don't have class, go along, shake hands, you might learn something, get some business cards. So you only need to be there for half an hour. Doesn't need to be a big deal. So what I'm doing here is I'm kind of going from the easy stuff down to the hardest. Ask for introductions. Ask me, Rachel, your lecturer, old coals, people at college, friends and family. Get on the front foot. Tell them, I'm looking for a job in this sector. Do you know anyone who I might be able to speak to for advice, who might be hiring, whatever. Again, it doesn't necessarily come naturally, and for me, it felt a bit weird, but it's highly effective if you can bring yourself to do it. And as you can see from that pie chart, it really works. LinkedIn, we'll actually do a workshop on this next Wednesday. LinkedIn, I mention this because you can connect with people in your industry, alumni, old coals, and again, same thing, ask them for advice, looking for jobs, that kind of stuff. Can be quite effective if done well. So if you're interested in that, come to the workshop that Caroline and I are doing next Wednesday. So now we're getting into the more uncomfortable stuff. The cold calling, cold email. Cold calling is the more effective. It's also more uncomfortable. But it's particularly effective with the smaller employers, which we're about to talk about, because the bigger employers will tend to have layers of reception and all the rest. The smaller employers, you're just as likely to get the owner of the firm or the decision maker, and if you can confidently get chatting to them on the phone, there's every chance you'll end up in there for an interview and get a job. And now, because we're now on the more difficult end of the spectrum, we're at the end of at the end where not many students are actually doing this. So if you're doing it, you're setting yourself apart. Cold emails as well, not as effective, because it's so much easier to hit the delete without responding if someone's busy. It's pretty hard to say no to a young, enthusiastic person who's put themselves out there. You have to be pretty callous to shut them down without at least getting them in to meet them. I'll give an example, because I know you kind of think, as if anybody actually takes these calls. At Prosple, we don't generally hire graduates, or haven't for the last 4 years, just because it doesn't fit in with our org structure, and it's much easier for us to hire experienced people, with one exception. There's this guy called Michael Liu. He's studying marketing at Melbourne Uni, I think. And the only reason he's working with us is because he bloody just about knocked down our door to get a job. I don't know how he knew someone or whatnot, cold calling, all the rest, but really persistent, really showing a lot of initiative. He wanted some marketing work experience. And in the end, we just thought, oh shit, I mean, marketing is one of those things where the hustle's half the battle, right? And this guy's clearly got the hustle, so why don't we give it a shot? And he's doing a great job. Now, the reality is, if we had advertised for that role and Michael's CV had ended up in a stack of CVs alongside a bunch of other people, he probably wouldn't have got an interview, because on paper he doesn't look that great. But he's got that X factor that means he's happy to get on the phone, he's happy to hustle, and that's carried over into the way he's working for us, doing PR work with journalists, all that kind of stuff. So it does happen. That's a real life example. And then finally, the good old walk-in, where you print your CV off and dress well and bold as brass, walk up to the front door, introduce yourself, shake hands, and tell them you want a job. Difficult to do, ballsy, but if you're willing to do it, pays off. Because it's rare. Most people don't have the guts to do that. It won't work at the Deloittes and PwCs of the world, because you won't get past security. And I know that because we've got sales team who back when we started Prosple, that was literally how we had to get in front of people. That's a whole other story. But, if you're looking at smaller firms or employment options that are a bit, non-traditional, then plenty of opportunity just to roll up and introduce yourself and get chatting. And then, of course, there's the organic way, and what I'm doing here is listing the exact same extracurricular stuff that we talked about before. So you can start to see a theme, right? It's almost a vicious circle. You're doing all this good stuff, you're becoming a well-rounded, fully formed adult who takes on responsibility. Not only does that look good on your CV, but you're meeting people, you're building a network, they can introduce you to people. It's a vicious cycle. And it seems to me that it's often the case that because of that, it is a vicious self-fulfilling cycle, that a lot of grads either get no offers at all or more than they know what to do with, and there's not much in between, because it does feed on itself in that nature. All right, so to the point about smaller employers. I really want another big takeaway from tonight, what I'd really like you to take away, is this idea of thinking outside the box. This is data pulled from Prosple, so we have job boards, employers pay to advertise. This is between February and April. We had about 400 employers posting jobs on our website. Now what we've got here is the employers and the number of applications per job or per employer. So you can see a pretty interesting trend here. You've got the big end of town who are receiving literally thousands of applications, and then you've got this long tail of employers who are receiving no love at all. And I look at this and I think this to me presents an opportunity for you guys, because everybody's it's a great big pile on for the big obvious employers who are doing all the marketing and have the sort of the big brands. But there's a lot of really cool opportunities at the long end of the tail here that, particularly if you've done the work in thinking about what types of jobs you're going to love, could be a great fit. So it's a classic example of the 80-20 rule. So keep that in mind. Don't fall into the trap like most graduates do of applying for 5 graduate jobs, but they're all at this end of the spectrum, because you're fighting, you're potentially making life really difficult for yourself by only going for the really competitive jobs. A lot of words here. I'll explain this with an anecdote. Why it is you might actually want to take smaller employers really seriously. I was lucky enough to start off consulting with a smaller employer. Again, not by design, just didn't have many options because I left it too late, and they were one of the few that were hiring when I finally decided I wanted, was going to sort my shit out. And typically they'd have consulting teams of 3, maybe 4 consultants. They have a partner, an associate, kind of like next level down, and then 1 or 2 business analysts, which is kind of what you do as a graduate. And that was it. That was the entire team, and you go into the client's office and, you were literally 25% of the team. And there was no getting around that. And there was no getting around you being given real responsibility right from the get-go. Because, again, you were 25% of the team. You couldn't afford not to be contributing. If I compare that to a bunch of friends who went into the larger employers, where, for example, you'd be doing similar projects with a team of 30 consultants. Think about the logistics of that for a second. Do you think, and you're right at the bottom of the hierarchy, and you're doing a consulting project, do you think you ever get to meet the client? You can't take 30 people to a meeting. It's not going to happen. You get responsibility by the teaspoonful. Often because they are so large, there's really rigid systems and processes and hierarchy that can be quite frustrating, if I'm honest. If you're one of these people that likes the idea of being thrown in the deep end and being given a lot of responsibility right from the get-go and learn by doing, then I'd really, really urge you to consider the smaller employers, because you can learn a lot more, broader experience. You're not just pigeonholed to one department. You get a broad view of how the entire company works. You get a direct exposure to partners. And partners are kind of, they run the firm. They're God in the consulting office environment. And to get direct exposure to a partner day in, day out in a project, it means a lot. And you just don't get that in bigger firms. So I'm giving a lot of consulting examples here, but the kind of thinking would equally apply to a engineering consulting firm or law firms or various other professional services. And then as you go through your career, like if you've started by jumping the deep end, hands-on, real-world experience right from the get-go, then that can open up doors. And it means you can progress more quickly potentially. It means because they don't have really rigid, for example, career progression pathways that you have to follow, you can negotiate stuff that suits you with your employer, because you're speaking to the decision maker. Whereas in a big firm, team of 30, you're speaking to your immediate boss, and they're 6 levels below the actual decision maker, and good luck them accommodating your stupid requests in a team of 30 people. Not going to happen. So again, that's probably another key takeaway, is think about what it is you're solving for, and really give smaller employers a shot, because there's a lot to be gained. All right, next question, and Sean, we talked about this. How do you actually find these smaller employers? Because they're not advertising on jobs boards, they're not at careers fairs, they're not doing branding work, they're not out there building their brand, they're doing their business, right? They don't have entire graduate recruitment teams running around campus spending money like the big end of town does. So they're not going to find you, you have to find them. So obviously use your network if you can, friends, family, introductions, lecturers, whatever. If that doesn't work, there's LinkedIn and Google Maps are both really effective. LinkedIn in particular, this is a screenshot of civil engineering, Sean. You go in, you search for organisations that are in Adelaide in the civil engineering sector and have less than 200 employees. So there's your hunting ground right there. And I think that turned up, 84 results? So there's 84 employers who've probably never heard from a graduate, and would be quite happy for anyone who's willing to get out there and put themselves out there. to take a call and have someone come in for an internship, and they're going to be right at this end of town here. In fact, they're not even advertising jobs, so there's probably no competition at all. All right, I will show you this. So this is this point about thinking outside the box in terms of non-traditional careers. So again, I went through civil engineering. Studying civil engineering, you have to be a civil engineer, and that's all that gets talked about. And it's what your lecturers are telling you. All your peers are going to be civil engineers. It doesn't even occur to you that there might be other options. I'll show you some examples, but this is again Prosple data. When these 400 employers post jobs, there's check boxes where they select the disciplines that they will accept applications from. I find this really interesting. Only 25% are hiring from one particular discipline. So this is a civil engineering job. You must have a civil engineering degree, and that's it. That's only one in four. Okay. All of the others are either hiring from multiple disciplines, or they don't care what you've studied. They've just checked the box that says all areas. Don't care. More than 1 in 4. And so to answer the question for how do you find these guys, let me jump onto Grad Australia. Bit of a shameless plug here. So this is one of the websites that we run, a bunch of graduate jobs. You can see here we actually organise the jobs by what are you studying. I have a qualification in. And we do that deliberately because all other jobs boards organise their jobs by sector. So straight away you get pigeonholed into civil engineering. Does that make sense? So again, I'll use civil engineering example. I'm studying engineering, civil engineering construction. Right, so we've got 115 results. This first one here, Optiva. Anyone heard of Optiva? Probably not. Yeah, one person. Wildly successful algorithmic trading firm. So, they would have made a lot of money these last 12 months with the markets the way they are. They are hiring civil engineers. Who would have thought that? I certainly wouldn't have, there we are, civil and construction. I mean, I'd never heard of quant trading, let alone thought of applying for it as a grad job. But if I was smart enough to think about what I actually enjoy, I probably would have loved this job. And firms like this love engineers. So just a simple example, but this idea holds true for all disciplines. I'd wager that if all of you went on to a job site like this and searched by discipline, you'd be quite shocked by the range of different opportunities that are out there that aren't directly related to what you studied. So keep that in mind because you may find something that's right down your alley and you really love, and B, just the fact that you're thinking outside the box and applying to something that, presumably most candidates who apply here are probably sort of business commerce students. And so if you're coming from engineering or science or, any other background for that matter, medicine even, you're going to stand out. Like straight away, it's something interesting for them to look at rather than the thousands of other business students. And vice versa, it works the opposite way as well for business students. So that's what I mean by thinking outside the box, and that's why I say probably easier to do this online rather than a careers fair. Work out some different sectors, some employers that might be interesting, and then go and meet them at a careers fair, because it's all published online. You'll know what careers fair they're going. So it may mean that as an engineer, you're going to a business careers fair, but that's fine. You're going there to talk to Optiva. In terms of next steps, I'd start by just taking the time, just set aside an hour or two just to think about what it is you're actually going to enjoy. Do that personality assessment to sort of guide you and perhaps shed some light on the types of things that matter to you and that don't matter to you, and then use that to start informing your next steps. Next thing, start getting involved in extracurricular activities, irrespective of where you are. Again, doesn't need to be world-changing stuff. Just go and do a stint at the soup kitchen, something like that. You know, I'm sure you guys are all busy, but there's no reason why you can't set aside a few hours a month for something like that. Draft your CV, and again, even if you're in first year, just do it now. If nothing else, it just highlights the gaps for you. There's nothing worse than getting, a week out from graduate job applications, you're drafting your CV for the first time, and you think to yourself, oh shit, I'm really scraping the bottom of the barrel here. Save yourself that hassle, draft it right now, and identify any gaps so that you can actually work on it. And make the most of myself. We've got a graduate CV writing guide which I'll share, lots of templates. All of the universities have a free CV review service, and again, you're paying for that, make the most of it, and then obviously come and see me. And finally, and again, regardless of what year you're in, just throw your hat in the ring for a couple of internships. Even if you're in first year, no harm in. Worst they can do is knock you back because you're not, you haven't got enough years under your belt. But it's basically, I think it was a free, no regrets, try before you buy. And at worst, you come out of it, you've done 3 months over summer, maybe you've earned a little bit of money, and you just think, thank God I'm not rolling to that for a lifetime of grad work, possibly. Or you loved it, in which case, great. But, if it's there for the taking, no reason why you shouldn't be throwing your hat in the ring for an internship. All right, cool guys. Well, thank you for coming. Well done for coming too, because I know I wouldn't have when I was at St Mark's, so you're already well ahead of me at a similar stage of your studies. So thank you for coming, well done. Feel free to approach me, shoot me a message, whatever. If you've got any questions afterwards, or like Caroline said, role playing, CVs, cover letters, all that kind of stuff. I'd love to help.